You grew up in an environment that taught you to view money with suspicion, not merely as an abstract concept, but as a physical sensation. You may not even realize it, but your body reacts whenever the topic arises. A palpable constriction in your chest when reviewing your bank statement, a sense of disquiet upon receiving a gift, a distinct discomfort when someone praises your work and offers a payment exceeding your expectations. This is no coincidence. Florence Scovel Shinn, whose seminal work has transformed thousands of lives worldwide, asserted that humanity's greatest financial impediment is not a deficit of opportunity, talent, or effort, but rather the silent, deeply entrenched conviction that we are undeserving of prosperity. This is not an intellectual belief. It is corporeal, emotional, indelibly inscribed upon our identity from an early age. The world trained you to associate wealth with guilt, shame, arrogance, exploitation, or even sin. And this subterranean programming molds your choices, sabotages your outcomes, and fundamentally constrains the extent to which you permit abundance to reach you. Allow me to introduce Claudia. She worked as an art teacher in a small school. Creative and dedicated, she loved teaching. Yet she perpetually lived on the financial brink. Even when she received proposals to conduct private workshops, she charged only nominal fees or accepted barter in lieu of payment. She rationalized that art was priceless, that knowledge should be accessible, and that charging more would alienate people. Yet, the underlying reality was far more profound. Whenever someone suggested she deserved to be well compensated for her talent, her body would seize up. She would recall her mother saying, "Money spoils people, darling. Those who earn too much inevitably forget where they came from." And this phrase reverberated in her mind like a condemnation. Consequently, when a major opportunity materialized, a renowned gallery wished to exhibit and pay for her work, Claudia panicked. She declined the proposal, asserting that she was unprepared, that her work was substandard, and that it lacked the requisite caliber for such an venue. Days later, filled with regret, she wept alone in the improvised home studio in her living room, realizing she had sabotaged the very chance she had always dreamed of. It was then that a friend lent her a book by Florence Scovel Shinn. Claudia read it, somewhat skeptical initially, but something within it profoundly resonated with her. Florence posited that when an individual rejects opportunities, discounted prices, compliments, gifts, or even money found on the street, they are not demonstrating humility. They are, in fact, energetically asserting, "I do not deserve to receive." This statement hit Claudia like an emotional blow. She realized she had spent her life repudiating, minimizing, and pushing away everything that could elevate her. Not due to a lack of desire, but due to a deep-seated fear of seeing herself as a worthy individual. Another case in point is Gustavo. He was a highly sought-after sports physical therapist, yet he consistently found himself burned out and grossly underpaid. He took on more patients than he could handle, charged minimal fees, and seldom took time off. Whenever he attempted to adjust his rates, he was overcome with guilt and invariably retracted the change. He genuinely believed that helping people necessitated sacrifice, and that earning a comfortable income while working in healthcare was inherently wrong. This continued until his back completely seized up during a session. He ended up hospitalized, unable to work for weeks. With no income and no savings, he was desperate. During this period, he started therapy and heard something that altered his entire perspective. "You believe you must suffer in order to be useful." The phrase stunned him. He had never consciously acknowledged this belief, but it resonated deeply. He had grown up hearing his father claim that honest people had to grind to survive, and that wealth only came to those who cheated others. When Gustavo returned to work, he decided to conduct an experiment inspired by Florence Scovel Shinn. He established a fair rate for his services and informed his patients about the upcoming adjustments. Many complained and left, but something unforeseen occurred. New clients emerged, willing to pay the full price and commit to the prescribed treatment. Gustavo began working fewer hours, delivering higher quality service, and watched his income soar. The most transformative realization, however, was that he deserved rest, he deserved time, and he deserved recognition. It was not merely about money. It was about identity. Then there is the case of Helena, who ran a small cafe in the heart of her city. The spot was welcoming and offered delicious food, yet it never truly prospered. Every time her revenue began to climb, something inevitably went awry. A piece of equipment would break down, an employee would quit, or a supplier would delay delivery. It was as if there were always an unexpected impediment. During a conversation with a consultant, she heard, "Do you notice that every time something positive occurs, you immediately anticipate the worst?" This question stopped her in her tracks. Helena was afraid to accept praise. She felt shame when someone claimed her cafe was the best in the area and always minimized the compliment. "Oh, that's just luck." Or "It worked out today, who knows about tomorrow?" She emotionally sabotaged herself to avoid dealing with the prospect of subsequent failure. Florence Scovel Shinn explained that when a person believes they cannot sustain success, the unconscious mind generates situations to confirm that very expectation. These stories illustrate that the problem is not external. It is not found in the market, the customers, the economy, or the competition. It resides in the internal narrative that silently dictates, "This is not meant for you." Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that worthiness is the key to prosperity. Not worthiness based on exertion or perfection, but intrinsic worthiness, the recognition that life is abundant and that you are inherently part of that abundance. When someone genuinely internalizes this belief, opportunities cease being threats and instead become open doors. Now, before proceeding, I want you to recognize something significant. You, too, might be living under the influence of this logic without realizing it. Perhaps you refuse gifts by saying, "You shouldn't have." Maybe you minimize compliments by stating, "Anyone could have done it." Or perhaps you never allow yourself the expenditure for something purely pleasurable. These seemingly minor behaviors are indicators of an internal system that obstructs financial flow. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that what you permit yourself to receive establishes the boundary of your abundance. And as long as you believe you must justify every achievement or chastise yourself for every joy, the universe will continue to mirror that back to you. When Helena began observing her patterns, she discerned something even more profound. Every time someone complimented her coffee, she experienced a physical discomfort, as if receiving recognition were tantamount to making a mistake. This seemed irrational, yet it made perfect sense when she recalled her grandmother repeating, "Modesty is a virtue, pride destroys." She had internalized the notion that displaying success provoked envy, and that those envied would be penalized by life. Consequently, she unconsciously dimmed her own radiance to maintain a feeling of security. Florence Scovel Shinn cautioned that many individuals harbor the belief that prosperity attracts danger, and this conviction causes them to sabotage any potential progress. Not because they lack the desire for growth, but because they have associated advancement with loss, rejection, or retribution. Upon acknowledging this, Helena undertook a simple yet potent action. She established a journal where she meticulously recorded everything that went right in the coffee shop. Every compliment, every significant sale, every loyal patron. Initially, it felt nonsensical, but over time, she began to experience genuine pride. She ceased justifying her success by attributing it to coincidence and instead began affirming, "I built this." The energy shifted, and the business stabilized in a way she had never previously experienced. It was not a sudden miracle. It was internal transformation mirroring external results, precisely as Florence Scovel Shinn described. And perhaps you are noticing a similar pattern within yourself. How often have you caught yourself declining an opportunity because you felt you weren't prepared? How many times have you received praise and automatically replied, "Oh, really? It wasn't even that good"? How often have you desired something, only to give up before even trying, fearing you might appear presumptuous? These reactions are not aspects of your personality. They are conditioning. They are phrases reiterated during childhood, painful interpretations of past experiences, and beliefs assimilated without scrutiny. And the most peculiar thing is that, even as an adult, you continue to obey this emotional programming as if it were absolute truth. Florence Scovel Shinn posited that the feeling of unworthiness acts as an invisible sentinel. Whenever life attempts to bestow something greater upon you, this guard closes the door to keep you relegated to familiar territory. This is because, to the unconscious mind, familiarity equates to security, even if the environment is intrinsically uncomfortable. This explains why so many individuals remain entrenched in jobs they despise, relationships that diminish them, or precarious financial circumstances. Not because they consciously desire these conditions, but because a part of them believes that is the space where they rightfully belong. Prosperity necessitates an identity capable of sustaining it, and if your core identity asserts, "I am someone who struggles and merely survives," your reality will invariably mirror that assertion. Now, consider a different scenario, that of Marcello. He was a designer, talented, creative, and brimming with remarkable ideas. Yet he constantly experienced frustration because his proposals were habitually rejected by larger clients. When he finally received an invitation to participate in a national competition, he immediately engaged in self-sabotage. He submitted the project late, incomplete, and subsequently told himself that he simply didn't care. Deep down, however, he knew he was terrified of winning. During a coaching session, he heard the pivotal question that became his breakthrough: what happens if you actually succeed? His tearful response was immediate: "I'll lose my friends. They'll assume I've become arrogant." Marcello realized that his social circle glorified hardship and routinely criticized those who achieved prosperity. Thus, unconsciously, he kept himself at their level to avoid exclusion. Florence Scovel Shinn elucidated that many people trade prosperity for belonging, sacrificing their true potential solely to circumvent rejection. Once Marcello internalized this truth, he resolved never again to diminish his talent merely to fit into restrictive spaces. He sought out new environments and new connections, and his career finally took off. These narratives illustrate a crucial point. Prosperity is not solely about financial gain. It is fundamentally about identity, belonging, and emotional security. If a part of your being harbors the belief that you will be punished, rejected, ridiculed, or isolated for achieving success, your mind will actively prevent that success from materializing. Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that all profound transformation commences when you shift your internal dialogue. Merely repeating superficial positive affirmations is insufficient. One must genuinely feel, accept, and fully internalize the concept of worthiness. This brings us to a potent practice known to only a few. Florence taught that transformation originates in the body. If you utter "I deserve this," while your chest constricts and your breath catches, your subconscious mind registers the impedance. Therefore, she instructed students to integrate affirmation with conscious breathing. You inhale deeply, focusing on the thought, "I receive," and exhale, focusing on, "I release the guilt." It seems straightforward, but when executed with mindfulness, it recalibrates the nervous system, minimizes resistance, and fosters internal space for new experiences. Claudia applied this technique before accepting her first art commission after years of refusal. Gustavo utilized it prior to announcing new rates. And you can employ it whenever you feel that characteristic discomfort associated with receiving something positive. There is also the power of intentional receiving. Many individuals accept aid or gifts while saying, "I'll pay you back later," as if they must compensate immediately. This nullifies the act of receiving. Florence Scovel Shinn maintained that receiving with unadulterated gratitude is a spiritual exercise. When someone offers you something and you accept by saying, "Thank you, this truly means a great deal," you affirm to the universe that you are prepared for more. When you refuse, minimize, or attempt to return it, you affirm that you do not deem yourself worthy. Now, before we proceed to the most profound segment of this process, I must ask a significant favor of you. If this content is provoking introspection within you, if any of these narratives have prompted you to consider your own patterns, I want to invite you to become part of this community of transformation. Subscribe to the channel right now. Not merely to support this endeavor, but to continue receiving messages that can fundamentally alter your relationship with prosperity, with worthiness, and with your very identity. Take a moment to leave a comment detailing something you realized about yourself while watching this video. It could be a simple phrase, an anecdote, or a feeling. Sharing this reinforces your internal journey and inspires others who are navigating similar paths. Furthermore, I want to know, what was the defining moment in your life when you felt you self-sabotaged because you did not believe yourself to be deserving? When you write this down and acknowledge it, something within you begins to shift. Transformation becomes tangible. So, drop a comment, engage, and connect with us. I am here with you on this journey, just as Florence Scovel Shinn guided so many individuals before us. When you begin to discern these patterns, a peculiar phenomenon transpires. The mind endeavors to maintain the status quo. Not out of malice, but because it has been conditioned to equate stability with survival. Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that the subconscious operates as an ancient sentinel, primed to avert anything that appears emotionally perilous. And for many individuals, true prosperity feels excessively hazardous. Not because of the funds themselves, but due to the inherent emotional valence they carry. Money, for some, signifies accountability. For others, it denotes exposure. For yet others, it represents unrelenting demand, scrutiny, envy, the forfeiture of affection, and judgment. Thus, even though consciously you articulate, "I want to thrive," if a part of you believes that prosperity engenders suffering, it will invariably obstruct the process. This is why so many people experience a puzzling cycle. Just as things begin to ameliorate, an unforeseen complication arises. They receive a raise, and the car breaks down. They finalize a contract, and they fall ill. They set aside some savings, and a sudden, unanticipated debt materializes. This is often dismissed as ill fortune, but Florence Scovel Shinn posited that this pattern is emotional self-sabotage, engineered to keep the individual at a perceived baseline of safety. Not financial security, but psychological security. Because the familiar is inherently comforting, even when it is painful. A case in point is Renato. He was a talented event photographer with a fully booked calendar, yet he could never retain savings. Whenever he amassed any significant amount, he would purchase expensive, unnecessary equipment or embark on impulsive excursions. He rationalized by claiming he needed to invest in his career or live life. But fundamentally, he harbored an apprehension of having reserves. In a discussion with a mentor, he was asked, "What do you feel when you contemplate having fiscal stability?" His reply was immediate: pressure. For him, possessing money implied that people would harbor greater expectations, demand more, and judge him more harshly. Consequently, he liquidated his funds to circumvent that feeling. Upon comprehending this, he recognized that his issue was not fiscal, but affective. Florence Scovel Shinn frequently reiterated that no one squanders money randomly. They lose it because, on some level, they believe it is fundamentally safer to be without. An equally illuminating instance is that of Sylvia. She was a well-known and revered nutritionist, but every time she received accolades designating her a leading authority in the field, she was seized by a profound sense of dread. When invited to appear on a local television program, she fabricated an excuse and declined. Days later, she confessed to a friend that she feared public exposure and subsequent critique. Her fear was not failure, but success itself. She believed that the greater her visibility, the more vulnerable she became. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that many individuals shun growth because they equate expansion with assault. They assume that by prospering, they become targets. And to preempt this sensation, they erect invisible barriers. Upon realizing this, Sylvia devised a potent exercise inspired by Florence's teachings. She began writing 3 affirmations daily. I can thrive and be secure. I can be seen and be respected. I can grow and maintain my essence. This simple act of integrating security with the concept of prosperity fundamentally altered her internal disposition. Gradually, she accepted more significant invitations, launched an online course, and tripled her income within 7 months. But more crucially, she felt she could occupy her space in the world without retraction. This point is pivotal. Prosperity is not merely about receiving more. It is about granting oneself permission to expand. Many individuals dream of a better life, yet when opportunity manifests, they experience discomfort and retreat. Florence Scovel Shinn maintained that prosperity necessitates the capacity for emotional containment. If one cannot sustain an internal sense of deservingness, the universe withdraws what cannot be held. This occurs not as a form of punishment, but through resonance. There exists an even deeper stratum. The the relationship with love. Florence asserted that, for many, money and love are connected in a distorted manner. Some believe that if they prosper, they will forfeit affection. Others are convinced they will only be loved if they are perpetually struggling. Still others feel guilt for having opportunities their family members lacked. They consequently diminish themselves so as not to leave anyone behind. This pattern is far more prevalent than it appears. Consider the case of Vinicius. He was raised in a humble family environment where everyone engaged in strenuous labor. When he secured a well-compensated remote position, he felt shame revealing the extent of his earnings. Whenever his family voiced complaints about hardship, he felt culpable and ended up remitting nearly all his income to assist them. This was not born of generosity, but rather from a belief that he was not entitled to a better standard of living. Florence Scovel Shinn stated that financial guilt is one of the most potent forms of self-sabotage. The individual punishes themselves for thriving. Only once Vinicius grasped that prosperity does not diminish others, and that he could provide assistance without self-destruction, did he begin to stabilize his life. He learned to contribute consciously while maintaining his stability. Subsequently, his prosperity finally began to burgeon. Now, perhaps you are discerning a similar pattern within yourself. Perhaps you have experienced guilt when acquiring something you truly desired. Perhaps you have downplayed achievements to avoid seeming arrogant. Perhaps you have concealed victories out of fear of judgment. All of this points toward a central theme: identity. Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that you never receive beyond what you believe yourself to be. You may petition, desire, and work diligently, but if your identity dictates, "I am someone who just manages," you will perpetually manage. If it dictates, "I am someone who struggles," struggle will invariably persist. When you transition to affirming, "I am someone who prospers," the world responds accordingly. And this is where a truly transformative practice comes into play. Florence advocated cultivating a clear internal image of the deserving self. Not merely visualizing affluence, but envisioning oneself completely comfortable within it. Picture yourself receiving accolades with equanimity, embracing opportunities joyfully, maintaining financial security, and being valued without a trace of guilt. This internal blueprint, through consistent repetition, effectively rewires one's identity. The subconscious mind gradually begins to assimilate this elevated state as inherently natural. While many assume prosperity is initiated by action, Florence asserted that it originates from permission. Permission to receive. Permission to experience pleasure. Permission to expand. Permission to be visible. Permission to embrace happiness. Once this internal sanction is granted, action becomes light, fluid, and intuitive. It ceases to be a struggle. It becomes a state of effortless flow. This state of flow is ultimately predicated upon a single recognition: you are deserving. Not because you have toiled sufficiently. Not because you have endured adequate suffering. Not because you have validated your worth to the world. You are deserving simply because you exist. Because life is inherently abundant, and you are an integral component of that abundance. When this profound truth begins to take deep root, everything shifts. As this truth begins to settle in, even in its incipient stages, the surrounding world responds. Not due to some external magical occurrence, but because your subsequent choices undergo a quiet yet potent transformation. Florence Scovel Shinn maintained that life invariably delivers that which you genuinely believe is possible for yourself. When you perceive yourself as someone barely able to sustain yourself, you opt for meager opportunities, demanding clientele, draining employment, and relationships requiring perpetual exertion. Conversely, when you begin to acknowledge yourself as a deserving individual, you start to select more judiciously. You consciously decline what diminishes you, and this straightforward action creates the necessary space for what truly elevates you. This paradigm shift was precisely what Andre experienced. He was in digital marketing and consistently accepted any client, even those who treated him poorly or demanded unattainable outcomes. He lived in a perpetual state of exhaustion, answering messages well into the early hours, constantly fearing the loss of contracts. One day, having attended a lecture on self-worth rooted in Florence Scovel Shinn's principles, he resolved to take an action unimaginable to his previous self. He terminated the contract with his most abusive client. The instant he dispatched the notification, he was seized by profound panic. His mind immediately bombarded him with accusations. You are irresponsible. You will have no income. No one will hire you. Yet, he took a deep breath and anchored himself steadfastly to his newfound sense of dignity. 3 days later, he was contacted by a significantly larger corporation, offering remuneration nearly 3 times higher for the identical scope of work. He accepted. He realized that the universe was not penalizing his decision. Rather, it was reciprocating his elevated internal stance. This is a cornerstone concept. The universe responds to the energy of worthiness. When you position yourself as someone who accepts crumbs, that is precisely what you receive. When you position yourself as someone who values your time, your talent, and your presence, the world takes notice. Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that life always mirrors what you believe yourself to be. Not what you articulate, but what you genuinely feel. And this transformation does not manifest solely in work or finances. It emerges in unexpected domains. People begin to treat you with heightened respect. Distinct invitations surface. Situations that previously seemed unattainable now begin to unfold organically. It is as if a new frequency has been activated within you. And, in a way, it has. But it is crucial to understand that this process awakens deep-seated resistance. Once you begin to allow yourself to receive, the archaic mind enters protection mode. It will attempt to pull you back into the old pattern with thoughts such as, "This is too good to be true. It's going to fail. You shouldn't celebrate yet. You don't deserve all of this." These thoughts do not signify failure. They are indicators that the outdated system is being dismantled. Florence Scovel Shinn used to say that resistance is the final gatekeeper before change. When it appears, it signifies that you are traversing an internal boundary. A powerful example of this is Renata. She had always dreamed of opening a small decor shop, but continually claimed she was incapable, stating she lacked sufficient funds, adequate experience, and proper support. After she began implementing worthiness practices inspired by Florence, she decided to take the first step. She rented a small co-shared space and started selling handmade pieces. In the first month, she sold far more than she had anticipated. Upon receiving the revenue, instead of celebrating, she felt an inexplicable sense of despair. The next day, she experienced an emotional meltdown, argued with her partner, cancelled orders, and returned part of her inventory. Only afterward did she realize she was sabotaging her own success out of fear of subsequent loss. For her, growth equated to risking disappointment. Once she grasped this, she began applying a daily decree: I am safe while prospering. I can grow with stability. I allow success to remain. Within a few weeks, her store regained momentum, and this time she was able to emotionally sustain the growth. This illustrates how worthiness is not merely about receiving, but about retaining. And perhaps this resonates with you. Perhaps you have already lived through a moment where something profoundly good occurred, and shortly thereafter, everything seemed to collapse. We often interpret this as bad luck, fate, or retribution. But Florence Scovel Shinn claimed it is merely the unconscious mind attempting to revert to familiar territory. Prosperity necessitates emotional expansion. It is as if the heart needs to acclimate itself to a new internal space. And there is a practice that significantly expedites this process, what Florence termed the conscious expenditure of honor. This is not about impulsive or irresponsible spending, but rather selecting something that signifies self-care and purchasing it intentionally, imbued with the conviction that you are worthy. It might be a simple object or a modest experience, yet the symbolic act communicates to the subconscious mind, I value my existence. Individuals who engage in this consciously report profound transformations, as they cease associating pleasure with guilt. Another cornerstone concept from Florence Scovel Shinn is that of circulation. Stagnant money equates to stagnant energy. When you hoard every penny out of fear, the flow diminishes. When you allow it to circulate judiciously, The flow amplifies. This does not advocate for extravagance, but rather confident movement. Consider the behavior of those who constantly bemoan their lack of funds, yet simultaneously treat the little they possess with carelessness, disorganization, and a lack of reverence. This communicates devaluation to the universe. When you organize your wallet, settle accounts with gratitude, and celebrate financial influxes, you fundamentally alter the vibration of money in your life. And here we encounter something profound: conscious gratitude. Not merely uttering "thank you," but feeling genuine appreciation for every financial deposit, no matter how minor. Florence asserted that gratitude is a multiplier. That which you acknowledge expands. That which you disregard recedes. Now, before we proceed to the concluding segment of this transformative process, I wish to make a heartfelt request of you. If this content has resonated with you thus far, if it has spurred reflection, if it has awakened any awareness regarding your relationship with worthiness and prosperity, I invite you to strengthen this journey alongside me. Subscribe to the channel now. This is not merely a gesture of support. It is a commitment to yourself. Furthermore, take this opportunity to leave a comment detailing which insight has been the most impactful for you so far. Your participation generates a powerful collective movement, inspires others, and demonstrates that you are consenting to this transformation. And I genuinely want to know, what was the first recollection that surfaced in your mind when we discussed self-sabotage? Sharing this helps dissolve shame and fosters connection. We are cultivating a community founded on growth, courage, and worthiness, guided by the teachings of Florence Scovel Shinn. When you begin to inhabit this new reality, something extraordinary unfolds. Prosperity ceases to be an exertion and becomes a state of being. This does not imply an absence of challenges, but rather that when confronted with them, you do not automatically revert to your former identity. Florence Scovel Shinn maintained that the true miracle is not when the money arrives, but when you no longer feel a sense of culpability about receiving it. This marks the inflection point. It is when the financial flow ceases to incite anxiety and begins to cultivate serenity. When you are able to look at an opportunity and affirm, "This resonates with me, I accept it." When you can purchase something you desire without the feeling of committing a transgression. When you can review your bank account without trepidation. This transformation becomes manifest not merely in measurable outcomes, but in demeanor. Individuals who previously felt compelled to demand discounts now begin to willingly pay fair value. Those who shunned praise start accepting it with ease. People who spent their lives justifying achievements now proceed to celebrate them. This is the clearest indication that the internal programming has been recalibrated. Florence Scovel Shinn asserted that genuine prosperity is measured by the capacity to receive with equanimity. A compelling illustration of this is the case of Adriano. He was a musician who had played in bars for years, perpetually lamenting the scarcity of recognition. He insisted that no one valued art, that the market was inequitable, and that opportunities were reserved exclusively for those with connections. However, after hearing about worthiness, he undertook a simple exercise. He adjusted his repertoire to include songs he genuinely loved and simultaneously doubled his fee. Initially, he forfeited a few gigs, but shortly thereafter, he was invited to perform at a corporate event, commanding remuneration far exceeding his previous earnings. This event connected him with influential individuals who opened doors he had never conceived of. When he received the first substantial payment, he felt the compulsion to immediately liquidate the entire sum, as was his custom, but something divergent transpired. He resolved to set aside a portion of the funds, not out of fear, but out of deference to his own labor. This singular gesture was highly symbolic, for it was the first time he had behaved as someone who truly valued his artistry. Florence Scovel Shinn stated that the universe responds to symbols, and this was a potent symbol indeed. Another example is that of Teresa. She worked in an office and consistently felt invisible. She put in overtime hours and took on responsibilities, but was never acknowledged. When she began implementing practices of worthiness, a subtle transformation took place. She started speaking with greater assertiveness, establishing boundaries, and articulating her ideas clearly. Within a few weeks, her boss noticed her bearing and nominated her to lead a significant project. In the past, Teresa would have refused out of fear of inadequacy, but this time she accepted. And while working, she mentally repeated a decree inspired by Florence Scovel Shinn. I am capable of leading with wisdom. I deserve to be acknowledged. Upon the project's completion, she was promoted. But the most striking change was her own self-perception. She finally felt seen. Not because others changed first, but because she fundamentally altered how she positioned herself. These examples illustrate that prosperity is not solely dependent on external circumstances, but on how you relate to yourself. When an individual begins to treat themselves with reverence, the world reciprocates in kind. Florence Scovel Shinn taught that life is an echo. What you affirm internally returns as experience. And there is one final element that solidifies this process: forgiveness. Many people harbor financial resentment. They feel anger over lost opportunities, injustices, personal mistakes, or poor decisions. They feel guilt regarding past choices, impulsive spending, debts, or dependency. And this emotional burden creates an energetic knot that hinders the flow. Florence asserted that forgiveness is the spiritual solvent that dissolves blockages. When you release guilt and resentment, the channel opens. It is not about forgetting, but about recognizing that the past does not dictate your capacity to prosper in the present. A powerful exercise involves writing a letter of release, declaring, I forgive myself for all financial decisions made in pain, fear, or ignorance. I release the guilt. I allow myself to begin anew. This simple gesture creates space for something new to enter. We then arrive at one of the most symbolic and transformative rituals taught by Florence Scovel Shinn, the ritual of anticipated receiving. You act as if you have already received what you desire, not by pretending, but by cultivating the inner sensation of fulfillment. This is not delusion. It is emotional training. When you manage to sustain the feeling of prosperity prior to the outcome, your subconscious begins to recognize this state as familiar. And, as Florence affirmed, what becomes familiar manifests. However, there is one aspect many people overlook. You must honor every achievement, no matter how minor. Found a coin? Celebrate it. Received a compliment? Express sincere gratitude. Managed to save something? Acknowledge the progress. This sends a clear message to the universe. I value what I receive. And that which is valued multiplies. We now arrive at the paramount moment of this expedition. The profound awareness that prosperity is not merely a destination, but a paradigm of existence. When you allow yourself to receive, share, grow, and celebrate, you initiate an unending cycle of expansion. There are no bounds to the degree of prosperity you can attain once you dismantle the limiting belief of unworthiness. And now, I wish to extend a special, earnest, and heartfelt invitation. If this content resonated deeply with you, if it stirred something profound within your spirit, or if it illuminated a path of clarity or hope, I urge you to subscribe to the channel and continue this journey alongside me. Your engagement fortifies this community and ensures this message, which draws its inspiration from the wisdom of Florence Scovel Shinn, reaches more individuals who are in crucial need of hearing it. Moreover, I deeply encourage you to share your narrative. Please articulate in the comments. What has been the most significant breakthrough you have experienced since you began cultivating your sense of self-worth? Alternatively, if you are just commencing this work, which domain of your life are you prioritizing for liberation? Sharing these insights fosters genuine connection and inspires others to unlock their own internal gateways. And naturally, I am eager to know. Did this video resonate with you? Was it beneficial? What profound insight did you gain? Your lived experience is invaluable. Let us collectively forge a sanctuary of mutual support, continuous growth, and true abundance. I stand here in solidarity with you, just as Florence Scovel Shinn stood with countless individuals who radically transformed the trajectory of their lives.